Hello, this is going to be a reading of a book of Rudolf Steiner's, which is really just a collection of lectures. It's 14 lectures by Rudolf Steiner, and it has been titled Rosicrucian Wisdom. We'll start off with the introduction here. Let's go. The term Rosicrucianism is by no means foreign to the broad spectrum of spirituality today. In this course of lectures, given comparatively early in the lecturing phase of his career, Rudolf Steiner introduces those aspects of Rosicrucianism on which spiritual science, in parentheses, one of Steiner's terms for the body of research that resulted from his work, has light to shed and with which it is intricately connected. Though containing a wealth of insight into the spiritual content of Rosicrucian wisdom and practice, it seems fair to describe what is contained in this volume as only one introduction. If one bears in mind Steiner's contention that if the fullness that lies behind such spiritual wisdom were to be described extensively, a new language would have to be invented. This was clearly not Steiner's immediate task. Indeed, his vocabulary and syntax can be followed with lucidity by the kind of mind for which such ideas are entirely new, or by those who consider themselves as mere beginners on the inner path of development. At the same time, 14 lectures make a sizable volume when transcribed in this way, so that when one has finished reading the last page, there can be little doubt qualitatively that the whole must be reflected fully, if not contained, in this introductory part. What might the most intrinsic components of that whole be? Since Steiner is not writing in a systematic survey of Rosicrucian wisdom, ideally, each person would need to crystallize this from the lecture course for themselves. An introduction such as this may serve, however, to enable the reader, the inquirer, or the student to be able to embark on this crystallization process more effectively, rather in the sense that a good guide will enable the visitor to gain a fuller experience, say, of Botticelli's Primavera, than would otherwise be gained from the necessarily brief visit to the Uffizi that most hectic tourist schedules in Florence permit. Which leads us directly into one of the components of the spiritual stream of Rosicrucianism with which Steiner is concerned. It is a body of knowledge, in parentheses, or even mode of living, ideally suited to the busy person whose life, nevertheless, is self-motivated by a wish or resolve to find practical ways of alleviating the world's problems. Solving them might be too presumptuous a claim, though it is obviously what ultimately needs to come about. Though Steiner deals elsewhere with the historical background that is directly concerned with the being of Christian Rosenkreuz, the individuality after whom Rosicrucianism is named, here it is clearly not his immediate concern. However, in the last lecture, he does point out that the spiritual source from which all later esoteric training derives can be traced back to the Athenian teacher and pupil of St. Paul, Dionysius the Areopagite. Corroboratively, a hint of this occurs in 1 Corinthians 2:6-7, in which Paul speaks of theosophia, the wisdom of God, the same term having been used in the original German title and in the title of an earlier translation of the lectures into English, Die Theosophie des Rosenkreuzers, a term which was superseded for Steiner by anthroposophy. When he distanced himself from the certain ideas being promulgated by the leading theosophists in the years shortly after his lecture course took place. Howbeit, we speak of wisdom among them that are perfect, yet not the wisdom of this world, nor the princes of this world, that came to naught. But we speak the wisdom of God in a mystery, even the hidden wisdom, which God ordained before this world unto our glory. In parentheses, the King James Version, my emphasis. This aspect of Rosicrucianism, however, its esoteric training, in parentheses, hidden wisdom, as the translation puts it, is not one that Steiner is content merely to make passing reference to. Insofar as it is possible to go into such detail, he describes the 7 stages on this inner path. Furthermore, he makes it abundantly clear that the training is distinct from what he calls the Christian path, a fact which could, in the first place, be of central importance for many people today, the distinction notwithstanding all that he had to divulge about the Christ being on numerous occasions elsewhere, or, perhaps even more paradoxical, his allusion to the Pauline roots of esoteric training. This is not the place to rehearse the 7 stages, let alone expand on them. Suffice it to say, however, that as the first stage is designated study, one could consider the whole book as an example of how to set about placing one's first footstep upon this path. Not that Steiner fences in a number of fields of study and sets about devoting one lecture to each of them. Despite the helpful titles to each lecture and the build-up of the body of knowledge that results, Steiner's style of lecturing, which makes it so refreshing for the modern thinker, is one in which he ranges freely around his core theme. This may well be the result of having to give the listener access to concepts for which the new language has not been invented. Do we not find poets constantly attempting something similar through the use of metaphor and imagery? Though frequently they may have to stop short at, as well as coin, language that does little more than offer a peephole of perspective towards the ineffability that they divine. However strong their divining might be. Perhaps this mode of study could be best exemplified by looking at the problems of the day to which Steiner alludes, though he does so seemingly with little more than passing reference, by seeing, in view of his contention that modern Rosicrucianism is a way of bringing spiritual wisdom into the service of practical life, in what ways he addresses the problems. Not that Steiner has quick-fix solutions to offer, nor that he structures the lecture course into compartments that neatly consider each problem in turn. His aim, rather, is to open up the broad horizon of Rosicrucian wisdom, culminating, as already mentioned, in the final lecture, in which he speaks about the inner path of one who would seek further for solutions to the problematic situations that life presents, where individuals may earnestly feel drawn towards making a contribution out of themselves. The problems which Steiner cites are education, the social question, medicine, food, and feminism. For some, these may come as a surprise. It was still only 1907. Could the short list of priorities, given slightly updated wording, be so very different at the turn of the millennium, 93 years and 2 world wars later? There surely cannot be many editions of the New York Times that are silent even on one of these counts. Yet, it does not at all come across that Steiner was assuming airs of prophecy. There is no suggestion that unless the Rosicrucian approach be considered and taken practically into account, the problems that at present gnaw into the heart of society will not retreat. Nonetheless, not only have they not retreated, but one can experience them advancing on several fronts, sometimes, nay frequently, drastically. Isn't that all so true right now in the world? Look around us. A lot of what Steiner said in a lot of his lectures that you can find on Rudolf Steiner Press Audio on YouTube. A lot of his predictions of how the world would unfold are coming true just almost to a T. It's quite amazing. This guy was quite the seer back in the day. All right, let's continue. Hence is to be found passim throughout all 14 lectures, the Rosicrucian approach to each of these pressing questions with which humanity wrestles. The approach presents, as might be expected, a common method for each situation, at least at the outset, which could be summarized as follows: to look comprehensively at the phenomena, to identify which of these are particularly significant, to remain passive as far as feelings are concerned. In parentheses, feelings will play their part later. To allow the phenomena to impress themselves upon one's inner being, to let them speak, and from this research, the field of wisdom from which a solution will need to be drawn, and when this field is sufficiently and assuredly within sight, and one's feelings of conviction and compassion also having achieved the necessary degree of objectivity, then to determine the best way to act. It would be naive to think of the healing of society's ills as anything other than a very long haul and requiring a commensurately long-term commitment. Nor is this the place to do more than mention the value, indeed, often the necessity, of shorter-term plasters that are often called for when the immediacy of a situation cannot humanly wait for the long-term solution. Here again, the Rosicrucian path offers consolation. The first step toward acquiring the necessary wisdom in action being study, one can, if one is so minded, begin with deliberation at once, and at each stage of progress a proportionately valuable harvest may be reaped. This brings us back to the lectures as a whole, themselves more than a glimpse into the Rosicrucian treasure chest of spiritual knowledge that Steiner begins to open up. The nature of the child's incarnating as a vital part of the background to the educational question. The course of human evolution as part of the background to the social question and the steps needed to move towards global brotherliness, understanding, and tolerance. The complex constitution of the two sexes as part of the background to the feminist question, with all its repercussions that transpired as the century advanced, and so on. So much for the main substance that the lectures provide for all, though no doubt individual readers will come across cherries in the cake that are a particular delight or that lead to particularly awakening insights. As an example, that the heart muscles are structured in the same way as those used for voluntary acts, that the spiritual knowledge can itself provide the foundation for love in the future, that the fidgetiness so prevalent in the modern classroom has roots in the past, in parentheses, as well as all that is laid at the threshold of many modern lifestyles, that the mythologies of past cultures derive from a form of consciousness that is essentially different from the one we exercise in our mundane life today, but one that would have future significance if we could regain it, not by reverting to an earlier state, but by extending what we have so far achieved on this long and humanly precarious road to freedom. And there is, of course, much more. The knowledge of higher worlds can often seem to have little relevance when one is embroiled in the crammed craziness of rush hour and coping with the rising tide of legislation, in the trauma of a divorce case, in one's adolescence drug problems, in the GM tug-of-war going on behind officially required labeling, small printed somewhere amongst all the glittering packaging of the supermarket, in the flickering TV images of forlorn refugees in so many parts of the globe, in the soul-searing reports one reads of the acts of porn-polluted pedophiles, etc. A considerable volume of virtual space could be increasingly jammed with these and other realities that continuously beset us. But it is contrary to the Rosicrucian way to go into any sort of ascetic retreat in the face of personal trials or world disasters, on however large or small a scale they may be. For those concerned with seeking solutions to current problems, or simply with achieving compassionate insight, if that seems as much as can be done at the present, this course of Rudolf Steiner's lectures opens up the way to new resources and potential. Brian Masters, Winter Solstice, 1999. That is the end of the introduction, and we will proceed with Lecture 1 next time. Thanks again for listening. Like, subscribe, share with anyone you know would appreciate a reading of these esoteric materials. And thanks again. We will talk to you next time. Take care.